Here are incredible Scotch opening chess traps that will frustrate your opponents. Chess trap number 1, the King Hunt Special. Opening moves: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes pawn on d4, knight to g5. Now, here's where psychology matters. If you're facing an engineer, they'll calculate that pawn to h6 kicks your knight but doesn't see the deeper combination. However, the move pawn to h6 is exactly what we want. Continuation. Knight takes f7. King takes knight on f7, bishop to c4 check, king to e8. The king is now exposed, but your opponent might think they're safe. Then comes the crushing queen to h5 check. If king to e7, then queen to f7 check, king to d6, bishop to f4 check, king to c5, queen to d5 check, king to b6, and queen to b5 checkmate. Alternative line. However, if after queen to h5 check they play pawn to g6, then queen takes g6 check, king to e7, queen to f7 check, king to d6, bishop to f4 check, knight to e5, queen to d5 check, king to e7, and queen takes e5 checkmate. Chess trap number 2, the Overambitious Queen. Opening: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, queen to h4. If your opponent is a teacher, they might bring their queen out early to show you something, but this aggressive approach backfires spectacularly. Continuation. Knight to c3, bishop to b4, bishop to e2, queen takes e4. Your opponent thinks they've won a pawn, however they've walked into a devastating trap. Knight to b5, bishop takes c3 check, pawn takes c3, queen to e5 protecting the pawn, pawn to f4, queen to c5 preventing the white to castle, knight takes c7 check, king to d8, knight takes a8. Chess trap number 3. Opening: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, then queen takes d4, knight to e7, bishop to c4, pawn to c6, knight to c3, pawn to d6, bishop to g5, queen to b6, queen takes d6, queen takes b2 plus attacking the rook, rook to d1, queen takes c3 check, bishop to d2, queen takes c4, queen to d8 check, king takes d8, bishop to a5 double check, king to e8, rook to d8 checkmate. Chess trap number 3, the Endgame Deception. Opening: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop to c5, bishop to e3, knight to f6, knight takes c6 plus attacking the queen, so pawn takes c6, queen takes d8 check, king takes d8. If you're facing a lawyer, they'll think this queen trade leads to a safe endgame. However, the position is far from equal. You're up with a bishop. Bishop takes c5 and white has a significant advantage. Chess trap number 4, the Knight Dance. Opening: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, queen to h4 attacking the pawn, knight to c3, knight to f6, knight to f5 attacking the queen, queen to h5 offering a queen trade, bishop to e2, queen to g6, knight to h4, and the queen is trapped. Chess trap number 5, the Discovery Checkmate. Opening: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to e7, knight to c3, pawn to g6 planning for a fianchetto, bishop to g5 pinning the knight to the queen, bishop to g7, knight to d5. This looks like a normal development, however black falls into a deadly trap. Bishop takes d4, queen takes, bishop, knight takes the queen, knight to f6 check, king to f8, bishop to h6 checkmate. The bishop move creates an unstoppable mating attack. Chess trap number 6, the classic scholar's mate variation. Opening, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, bishop to c4, bishop to e7, pawn to c3, pawn takes c3, queen to d5, knight to h6. If your opponent develops their knight to the rim, thinking they're being clever, then bishop takes h6. If the pawn takes h6, queen to f7 checkmate. Alternative. However, if they castle instead of taking the bishop, then bishop to c1, pawn takes b2, bishop takes b2, and the position remains complex, but you're up with a knight. Chess trap number 7, the pawn structure trap. Opening, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, pawn to c5, queen to d2, pawn to d6, bishop to d3, pawn to d5, pawn takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop to b5 check, bishop to d7, queen takes d5, bishop takes b5. You have a powerful queen. Chess trap. Number 8, the fork finish. Opening, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, bishop to c4, pawn to d6, pawn to c3, pawn takes c3, knight takes c3, bishop to g4, castles, knight to e5, knight takes e5, bishop takes the queen wow, bishop takes f7 check, king to e7, knight to d5 checkmate. The knight fork delivers checkmate because the king cannot escape the multiple threats. Scotch opening chess trap. Number 9, the sacrificial storm. Opening, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, bishop to c4, knight to a5, bishop takes f7 check, king takes f7, knight to e5 check, king to e8, queen to h5 check, pawn to g6, knight takes g6, pawn takes g6, queen takes g6 check, king to e7, bishop to g5 check, knight to f6, queen takes f6 check, king to e8, queen to g6 checkmate. This brilliant sacrifice combination shows how material can be less important than king safety. Scotch opening chess trap. Number 10, the complex endgame. Opening, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, bishop to b4, knight takes c6, pawn takes c6, bishop to d3, pawn to d5, pawn to e5, knight to g4, castles, bishop to c5, pawn to h3, knight takes e5, rook to e1, queen to f6, queen to e2, castles, queen takes e5, queen to f2 check, king to h2, bishop to d6, queen takes d6, pawn takes d6. Alternative line. If king to h1 instead, then bishop to h3, pawn takes h3, queen to f3 check, king to h2, bishop to d6, queen takes d6, pawn takes d6. The ultimate trap variation, final position, pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, knight to c3, knight to f6, pawn to d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, bishop to b4, knight takes c6, pawn takes c6, bishop to d3, pawn to d5, pawn to e5, knight to g4, castles, castles, pawn to f4, bishop to c5 check, king to h1, queen to h4, pawn to h3, queen to g3, pawn takes g4, queen to h4 checkmate. Alternative. If queen takes g4 instead, then bishop takes the queen, pawn takes g4, queen to h4 checkmate. There are more upcoming opening chess traps like this.